Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Ramblings of an Old Fart podcast. Hello, my name is Craig Warren. I'm 71 years old. Been married almost 53 years. Father of 9, grandpa to a bunch. I'm sort of retired. I retired at 65 to provide full-time care for my wife, who's had some pretty serious health issues. But lately I realized that I needed something to do to keep my mind active, to keep me sharp. So why not a podcast? I have a lot of experience. I've done a lot of different things in my 50-plus years in the workforce. So I definitely have a lot of opinions. So what more would you need? I should mention that I have never been a member of a political party, and I do not intend to do so. My podcasts do not come from a political place, just from a factual and common sense place. What I want to talk about today, I seen an article this week in the Federalist, and they were got some information out of a book by Jeffery Reynolds. It's called Behind the Curtain. And what they're talking about is there was a congressional examination going on. It's bringing some scrutiny to these decades-long practices of dark money, I guess is the best way to say it, and where it's coming from. In an underreported move on August 4th last year, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee and the Oversight Subcommittee announced a joint examination into whether nonprofits have acted as a funnel for foreign funding intended to influence domestic elections in violation of U.S. law. The respective chairs of this examination are Representative Jason Smith from Missouri and David Swikert from Arizona. And they released an open letter soliciting input from the public. Let me just explain. One of the reasons that this really struck a nerve with me is because we have been experiencing this dark money in matters here within the state. So this is something that I've witnessed firsthand. So we need to get into this and try and fix it. Anyway, among other examples that they cited in this open letter was reports of the financial activities of a Swiss billionaire named Hans-Georg Weiss, I think is how you say it, who has used a network of dark money to provide groups donate to radically leftist causes and campaigns in the U.S., according to the report. This came out in the New York Times in 2021. Weiss's foundations gave direct donation to tens of millions, donations in the amount of tens of million dollars to pro-democratic and anti-Trump nonprofits. The beneficiaries of this direct giving included prominent groups such as the Center for American Progress and the Priorities USA, as well as organizations that ran voter registration and mobilization campaigns to increase Democratic turnout. They built media outlets that are accused of slanting the news to favor the Democrats and sought to block Trump's nominees, and they were the ones that were pushing the Russian collusion stuff. They were all beneficiaries of this dark money. The conservative think tank Americans for the Public Trust filed a complaint at the Federal Election Commission over this Weiss financial activities, noting that under U.S. law, Weiss cannot directly or indirectly donate to federal political campaigns. In his book, Jeffery Reynolds' book, Behind the Curtain, he attempted to chronicle this vast array of dark money nonprofit organizations used to spread hundreds of billions of dollars annually to mostly leftist causes, is what he found at this point. I don't want you to think here that I'm just picking on the left here, because we're going to get into this. It's not just a left or right issue. So trust me, I will get into that as we go along. I'm just quoting, I'm using their words from this article. Most of this money is tax-exempt money. And he reached the conclusion that the amount of foreign influence into our body politic defies the imagination of most American voters and desperately needs to be investigated. His book cites examples of foreign influence over the environmental policy in blue states such as Oregon and Washington. He said that Even the Chinese Communist Party were promoting radical protests and movements. The foreign funding for environmental, in all these environmental networks there, was all, most of it was foreign funding. In Chapter 3, which he called greenwashing, he cites a 2014 minority report by Senate Republicans that were investigating these suspicious foreign funding activities. And in that report, it says an elite group of left-wing millionaires and billionaires, which this report refers to as the Billionaires Club, who directs and controls the far-left environmental movement, which in turn controls major policy decisions and lobbies on behalf of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I found that very disturbing. Why should we have dark money paying for lobbying efforts by one of our own government agencies? I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I found that extremely disturbing. But even more unsettling, a dominant organization in this movement is the Sea Change Foundation, a private California foundation which relies on funding from a foreign company who remains undisclosed. That's the dark part of the money. In turn, Sea Change funnels tens of millions of dollars into other but discrete foundations and prominent environmental activists who strive to control both policy and politics. Have you ever wondered how some of these activists, they never have a job, it doesn't seem like. They're always traveling all over the country, they're always protesting. Apparently they get paid pretty well from some of these organizations. Anyway, the report goes on to state, the failure to openly acknowledge this force and the silence of the media with whom they coordinate further emphasizes the fact that until today, the Billionaires Club operated in relative obscurity, hidden under the guise of philanthropy. Thus, this joint open letter from Ways and Means and Oversight comes as a welcome scrutiny into the decades-long practice of radical leftist nonprofits that deliberately obfuscate their funding sources. The extent to which such organizations use foreign funding to interfere in our elections demands urgent attention. Then the letter says, in part, the committee has learned that a super PAC recommended donations to a 501c3 organizations as the single most effective tactic ensuring democratic victories, and that large donations from wealthy donor to state election offices in 2020 may have been done in a manner that helps one political party over another. It goes on to state the committee had found significant amounts of foreign money is flowing through 501c3s and 501c4 nonprofits to influence elections. Okay, so Smith and Schweikert closed their letter with an ominous warning, noting that expansion of politics into almost all aspects of life, potentially requiring Congress to close loopholes exploited by nonprofit organizations to influence elections, often with funds from foreign sources. Okay, so that's what I want to get into today. As I mentioned, we're seeing this in Utah. Let me explain real quick. In 2018 it started, but a couple of groups, these nonprofit groups, got together and raised enough signatures to get a ballot initiative on the ballot. They wanted to take the redistricting authority away from the state legislature and form an independent commission. Of course, that's totally 100% against our Constitution. But they wanted to do this through this ballot initiative, which should never have been allowed. I mean, I'm just saying. In order to change our Constitution, we have an amendment process. But that's a whole different rabbit hole. But the point is, they were able to get that done and get it passed. So, but then the state legislature sued because, hey, wait a minute, that's unconstitutional. It shouldn't be allowed to stand. But of course, you know how our courts work these days. You can't. I just don't understand it. So anyway, as it ended up here recently. A judge basically chose her own map because the state couldn't come up with one that she liked, so she chose her own. So now this has been going through the state Supreme Court. He went to district federal court. But neither one of those courts addressed the actual constitutionality. The state court, the Supreme Court kicked out because they said there was some kind of a procedural error. And when it got to the federal district court, they actually took, they're cowards basically. They just took the easy way out. They cited some, like it's the Purcell principle, that if we can't make the decision and undo this so close to election because it creates confusion, right? Well, anyway, that's another podcast. But the point is, this was all done by dark money. But this is the ironic part here. They did this through a ballot initiative or referendum. But now we already have in process in our state, somebody has started a referendum or ballot initiative, and they've already gotten, as far as I can tell, I haven't seen the latest numbers, but I think they should have enough signatures to put on the ballot to undo what the previous group did. And I find this problematic because that was the reason in our national constitution and in most all state constitutions, they have the amendment process spelled out. And the purpose of that was to make it very difficult to change the articles of a constitution. Because otherwise you have exactly what we're having in Utah. You change it here and then somebody else comes along and changes it. And it's always back and forth. It's in a state of flux. And that's not what it was intended for. But anyway, let's get into this dark money thing. The dark money ecosystem is designed specifically to be opaque. The people giving the money don't want you to know that they're investing money and interfering with your business. But because these groups, the money is funneled from the rich people into these 501c3 organizations, who in turn spread it around to 501c4s, they eventually, nobody knows where the money comes from. It's hidden in that process. But eventually they have to file Form 990s with the IRS. And while they don't disclose the donors necessarily, they do list the grants where other groups that they've given their money to. So by tracing those grants, we can see basically the pipes that move the money around. It's from national hubs that goes from there into Utah, where we're experiencing it, and other states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, whatever. As early as early in 2026, the dark money spending has shattered all previous records. The 2024 cycle alone, the non-disclosing groups plowed $1.9 billion into federal races. That nearly doubled a record set in 2020. Here's kind of a breakdown here of the big three. And here's where I'm going to get into the red states too, or, the Republican side, the conservative side here, if you will. We're going to call this blue money and red money in correspondence with how we refer to our states. And we'll cover the big three offenders in all of these. Okay, so in the blue group, these groups focus on independent commissions and judicial challenges to legislative maps and things. Their funding often flows through fiscal sponsors like this Arabella Advisors, which hides the original source of the money. So to start off, we already talked about this Hans-Jörg Weiss, Swiss billionaire who has donated over $245 million just to the 1630 fund. This fund is the primary bank for local groups like Better Boundaries in Utah, which I'm very familiar with. Weiss focuses heavily on changing state laws via ballot initiatives. Then we have George Soros through his Open Society Foundation and the Democracy Alliance. Soros remains a central pillar. He is a major funder of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, chaired by none other than Eric Holder, which has spent over $50 million since 2020 just in these redistricting ballot initiatives. And then we have somebody I've never heard of before, and I guess that's probably the point. Pierre Omidyar, I have no idea if that's right. The eBay founder group, Democracy Fund Voice. It's a massive 501c4. They focus on election integrity and non-profit reforms, providing intellectual and financial backing for moving redistricting power out of the legislature and into these independent commissions. Okay, so on the other side, the red money, we have a group, it's Barced, I think is how you say it, and they have a $1.6 billion trust fund. It's the largest single donation in history, and that was donated by this Barced, Leonard Leo or something, and this was donated and it's controlled by this Marble Freedom Trust. And they use this war chest to fund groups like the Concord Fund, formerly Judicial Crisis Network, which spent $31 million targeting state judicial seats to ensure judges uphold legislative authority. Then we have Timothy Mellon, a railroad heir. He's one of the top GOP donors. He gave over $190 million recently to groups like Securing American Greatness, which is the national engine behind efforts to repeal commissions, including the signature gathering that we're experiencing in Utah, or recently experienced. And then we have Elon Musk. In 2025 and 26, he's kind of shifted his a lot of his tech donations to more of a structural donor. His super PAC and affiliated dark money groups have spent over $200 million in state-level infrastructure, specifically targeting state Supreme Courts in battleground states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So let's take a look at this. How much money are we talking? $1.9 million is the amount that they estimate just for the 2024 federal cycle. And these are all by non-disclosing groups. We don't really 100% know where all that money came from. But they estimate $150 million was spent by both sides, specifically in the redistricting legislation and the ballot initiatives in 2020. The total amount that these billionaires' families spent on federal elections in 2024 is roughly 20% of all election spending in the USA for that year. Think about that. 20% of all the money spent came from these billionaires. Okay, so here's how this works. They've created kind of a shell game because they want to remain anonymous. So what they do is they make a charitable donation to a 501c3, tax deductible to them. That 501c3, then they make grants to groups, other groups, and the 501c4 groups, political stuff. But once they move that money from the 501c3 to the 501c4, the donor's name is gone, right? So when that money hits Utah to hire signature gatherers or pay lawyers, or the billionaire's name is no longer on there. So all the public sees is a generic name like 1630 Fund or Securing American Greatness or Utahns for whatever. See, they do that quite often in particular states. They create these names that tie it into that state. They don't actually exist. They just create this name, trademark it or whatever they have to do, and then they fund it. But it's not really a true organization, right? So here's the magic. These groups, in their official filings with the IRS, their mission statement, it sounds incredibly noble and neutral and all of that stuff. But their bank accounts are used to fund some of the most aggressive partisan battles in the country. So let's get a look at some of the blue ones that we talked about earlier, and look at what their IRS mission statement says. Say the 1630 Fund, that's a 501c4. Their mission statement says is to promote advocacy and policy change, providing operational support to change makers committed to tackling society's biggest social challenges. But the truth of it is, the dark money of the left acts as a fiscal sponsor, allowing smaller state groups to pop up instantly without filing their own taxes. I don't know if you ever watched this, like on the news or something. There's something going on in your state, and then all of a sudden there's this organization just pops up overnight. They have all the funding, they have offices, they have signage, they have all of this stuff. Well, that's how it happens. Okay, the Hopewell Fund is a 501c3. This to help change makers maximize their impact, providing operational support from advancing equity to confronting climate change. Okay, the C3 is the sister to the 1630 Fund. It funnels charitable money into educational campaigns that happen to align with redistricting lawsuits. See, they're the ones that provide the funding for, the other ones like the 1630 Fund, those things. And then we have League of Women Voters. I'm familiar with those because they've been a part of all of this redistricting stuff here in Utah. Their mission statement says they're empowering voters, defending democracy, formed to help women take a larger role in public affairs. But nationally, they have become the primary plaintiff in redistricting lawsuits, using their nonpartisan brand to front legal challenges funded by the other hubs, these money people up above. Okay, so let's look at this from a national issue on these redistricting things in these groups. The 1630 Fund alone has revenues exceeding $190 million. And in most recently year reported, they'd spent over $148 million going out to grants to these groups at the state levels, trying to influence the redistricting. Okay, so let's take the conservative side, if you will. Let's look at that. The Concord Fund, the 501c4, they're kind of the same thing, but their vision is to promote liberty and justice and fidelity to the principles of federalism and the rule of law. And all that sounds great, but they want to try and influence the judges and the judicial overreach and things. And then we have Securing American Greatness, and theirs is basically the same, organized to empower, inform civic and cultural engagement grounded in American exceptionalism. And there's the same thing. Of course, they are behind some of the donations in this new ballot initiative in Utah designed to overturn the previous one. So anyway, this is what we've got here. As I mentioned earlier, this Concord Fund, this Marble Freedom Trust Network, currently has a war chest of $1.6 billion, thanks to a donor by this bar said, making it the largest single political pot of money that we've ever seen. But the numbers are jaw-dropping when you think about it. And this is the one of them that really bothers me here. In the 20 to 24 to 26 cycle here, 1 out of every $5 spent on elections came from 100 billionaire families. All right? Since the Citizen United ruling, it came out, dark money, non-disclosing 501c4s have injected more than $2.5 billion into the American, the political system. Redistricting specifically in 21 and 23, between 21 and 26, over $150 million is spent just on that. Okay, so the most powerful point I can make here is the name change on these. When a voter in Utah, like my state, gets a mailer from Better Boundaries or for Utahns for representative government, they think it's their neighbors, right? It's, oh God, this is local. This is people here that think this is the right thing to do. They don't realize that the mailer actually was paid for by a Swiss billionaire somewhere or a Texas billionaire somewhere. All right? We have essentially documented the globalization of our local elections, where a Utah school board or district map is just a proxy war for people who have never stepped foot in the state or maybe never even in the country. It's kind of funny how the boring paperwork actually hides the explosive reality. When you start looking behind these billionaires, where all the money comes from. So there's more that goes on with all this, and they all of them, they sound warm and fuzzy, but it's really tremendously damaging to our political system. One last thing I want to just go over with you is how we play a shell game with the money, but we also do it with the names. It's interesting. At the billionaire level, this is an investment in political strategy. At the IRS level, or the hub level, it's a grant for civic participation or to protect the rule of law. And at the state level, it's a neighborly effort for fair maps or ending judge-made maps, right? So the 1630 Fund and the Hopewell Fund, to show you how this all works out. They're sister organizations. They share the same office in Washington, D.C. They're managed by the same consulting firm, this Arabella Advisors. This allows a donor to give charitable money to a 501c3, which then gets washed into a 501c4 to be spent on the very maps and lawsuits that I'm seeing here in Utah. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. This can't make any sense. However, I guess if you believe that your side has to win at all costs, well, in some perverted way, I guess maybe it does. But what is the cost? And it's not just monetary cost. Consider this: 1 out of every $5 spent on U.S. elections comes from just 100 billionaires. Are you willing to let 100 billionaires control your life? At this point, they control you and me and the whole country because they control, in some way or another, our elections. I'm going to leave that thought with you because that's quite profound. So I guess that's it for today. I thank you for joining me. I hope you found it entertaining, educational, or thought-provoking. So join me next time, won't you? I'm Craig Warren, and this has been the Ramblings of an Old Fart podcast. God bless and keep you. Till next time.